Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're literally tearing down the old way of doing corporate training and building something entirely new. I mean, if your organization's learning and development catalog looks like a chaotic, overflowing closet of random courses, trust me, you are not alone. In This Explainer, we're unpacking a highly structured 1990s business methodology from human performance expert Guy Wallace. We're going to look at exactly how to transform your training catalog from a fragmented mess into a streamlined, high ROI business system.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the corporate training problem, then look at training as a product line, break down the PACT methodology, walk through the 4 phases of CAD, and finally, ask who actually owns the curriculum. Let's jump right in.
So, Part 1, the corporate training problem.
This is a widespread, incredibly costly issue that plagues almost every large organization on the planet. Take the number 18. Back in the day, when Guy Wallace was working at Motorola, he went looking across the massive corporation just to see how they taught soldering. Guess what? He found 18 different soldering courses scattered across various departments. And here's the absolute kicker. 75% of the content in those courses was exactly the same. No way, right? That is a massive waste of time, money, and development resources. And the crazy thing is, it happens everywhere.
That story brilliantly illustrates the core issue we're facing. Treating training as a series of isolated one-off courses, it's basically a recipe for costly redundancy. Every time a department needs a course, they build it entirely from scratch, completely ignoring that the department literally right next door might have just built the exact same thing. What we need to do instead is transition to a holistic system of training, where we map out the whole shebang from a macro level before a single dollar is spent on development.
Which brings us to Part 2, training as a product line. We're going to radically reframe how learning and development departments function by looking at, of all things, a car factory. To do this, we use curriculum architecture design, or CAD. CAD is a methodology for architecting an entire system of training as an integrated product line rather than a collection of isolated events. Think of it like a master blueprint. You wouldn't build a skyscraper by just randomly stacking bricks, right? You design the architecture first. Well, CAD does exactly this for corporate knowledge. Let's lean heavily into this manufacturing metaphor for a second. When Ford or General Motors build a new car, they don't invent a brand new radio or a brand new braking system for every single model. That would be insane. They have modular subassemblies. They share that exact same radio across 50 different cars. Well, training should operate the exact same way. We should have modular subassemblies of learning, like, say, a core module on time management or spreadsheets that can be shared across different job roles and then just customized at the very end. The whole point is captured perfectly in this quote from the source material. Turn all this training stuff into business stuff. CAD forces L&D to stop just churning out courses in a vacuum. Instead, you start making strategic, prioritized business decisions that actually deliver a real return on investment.
All right, Part 3, the PACT methodology.
If the training department is our factory, PACT is the core operating system powering the entire assembly line. Let's break down that acronym. First step, performance-based. This means absolutely nothing is created unless it anchors directly to actual job performance. Zero nice-to-know theoretical fluff. Accelerated means we use collaborative teams to slash development cycle times. Customer-driven is super vital. The business units, who are the actual customers of the training, they drive the decisions. And finally, training, which broadly includes everything from formal courses to structured on-the-job coaching.
Moving on to Part 4, the 4 phases of CAD.
So how do we actually assemble this blueprint? Phase 1 is project planning. Phase 2 is analysis. Phase 3 is design. And Phase 4 is implementation planning. This chronological process is flexible, for sure, but it gives us a highly structured way to handle incredibly complex organizational training needs without, getting completely overwhelmed. Let's look at Phase 1. It is all about wiring in the politics. You've got to form a steering team made up of high-level stakeholders, because if you don't secure that buy-in and manage expectations right on day one, they will absolutely sabotage your project down the line. You run the gauntlet early so you don't get stopped cold 6 months later. Next up is Phase 2, analysis. This is where teams of master performers and novices actually sit down to analyze ideal performance versus actual real-world performance. By finding the gaps between the two, you systematically derive the exact knowledge and skills a worker needs. You aren't guessing what to teach. The performance model tells you exactly what's required. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates why Phase 2 is so absolutely vital. Look at this $5 billion figure. The source details a massive Department of Defense project for composite aircraft parts that suffered a 0% yield after 2 whole years. Why? Because the very first step of their highly complex process, reading the job orders, resulted in workers consistently grabbing the wrong base materials.
That DoD disaster proves a massive point for us. Training must target the real root cause. Without rigorous performance analysis, L&D might have just built some advanced aerospace engineering course. But the root cause wasn't a lack of engineering knowledge, right? It was an inability to correctly parse confusing job orders on day one. Analysis saves you from building perfectly good training for the completely wrong problem.
Let's roll into Phase 3 and see how this builds into design. Here's where we take all those required skills we just identified, chunk them into modular events, and start placing them onto visual curriculum paths. We deliberately group volatile information away from stable information, creating clean, manageable chunks of learning.
So the crucial point of Phase 3 is organization, specifically this 5-tier inventory structure. Think of this like how parts are sorted and stored in our factory warehouse. Tier 1 is general orientation. Tier 2 is task overview. Tier 3 is the sweet spot, supporting knowledge and skills. This is exactly where you put your highly shareable, generic modules, like spreadsheet basics. Finally, Tiers 4 and 5 are the highly specific, localized how-to applications where you teach them to apply that spreadsheet skill to their specific department's budget. And that brings us to Phase 4 implementation planning. You've identified thousands of potential training modules by now, but let's be real, you can't build them all. Here, the steering team looks at the actual business budgets and sets strict development priorities. They make the tough make or buy decisions. This phase essentially guarantees you are only funding the training that the business truly cares about.
Finally, Part 5. Who owns the curriculum?
That brings us to our final takeaway, and it's a highly provocative philosophical shift for the industry. I want to pose this question directly to you, just like the source does. Who should actually own the curriculum design? Think about your own organization for a second. If you're training the engineering department, should the learning and development team own the curriculum, or should the engineering team own it? Well, the answer is we own the process, they own the content. As training professionals, we facilitate the architecture, we provide the methodology. But the subject matter experts, the customers, must own the actual content. Because if they own the content, they trust the output, they fund it, and they champion it. And just as a final rule of thumb for this entire methodology, avoid analysis paralysis. CAD is entirely about macro design for macro business impact. You're just designing enough to make executive resource decisions. You purposely leave the highly detailed micro design for the actual development phase later on. Basically, don't get bogged down in the weeds when you're supposed to be drawing the blueprint. Okay, let's wrap up with this final thought. Are you building an actual system of training, or are you just hoarding isolated redundant courses? It's time to step back, apply that car factory mindset, and turn your chaotic training catalog into a true business asset. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this sparks some incredible curiosity for your own organizational designs. See you next time.